What you're seeing here is a YouTube video that's been going around for the last couple of months about these two dogs, one of whom is very young, obviously, and one of whom is much older, and one of whom is equally naive about the general concept of going downstairs, and one of whom is significantly more practiced at going downstairs. And the reason this video is so popular, I tend to think, is because it shows what seems very conspicuously to be teaching in these dogs, and the active pedagogy of it is the part that seems most exciting to people. That the older dog repeats his performance and slows down the process, and as you'll see, gets involved in actively manipulating the younger dog to come down the stairs in a more fluid fashion. And he does that by grabbing him by the scruff of the neck and pulling him down. So, is that teaching? It would depend on your definition of teaching, which in this case is going to go by the animal behavior definitions of teaching, which, like many behavioral definitions, tend to rely on costs and benefits. And this is the classic definition of teaching in non-humans, and in theory it would apply to humans as well, by extension. The idea is that the behavior has to be modified for in theory, for the benefit of the naive observer, or it has to be modified to accommodate the naive observer's pace and ability to take in information in the amount of time it takes them to do that and to build on basic skill set. And the cost idea here is the reproductive fitness concept that we've been talking about and will continue to talk about. It's the part of this that gets modified the most in subsequent papers and research, that they look at different types of immediacy in the cost and benefits. That the benefits could come from reproductive benefits of increasing your offspring's viability by teaching them useful skills, and that could be, in theory, as immediate a benefit as anything else. Or there's arguments for prestige playing a role here, that a teacher gains prestige by performing pedagogy in front of dominant individuals, with often the dominant individuals' pups, which are going to be the main young members of a cooperative breeding system. And so if you want to get ahead, you might educate them. And of course, the basic definition here requires that the young animal or naive animal learn something and develop a skill or increase their fluidity with a skill, which is typically measured in the duration of their performance of that behavior. So for example, if they're trying to hunt something, which is something we look at in carnivores a lot, then the duration of the hunt process at each stage might be measured. The pursuit or the grabbing or the wrestling down, or etc. And the ants here are an example of insect teaching. There are a couple of generally accepted, for the most part, examples of active teaching and pedagogy in non-humans, and the ant Temnothorax albipennis is an example of that, where they have tandem running, and the ants will recruit other members once they've found a food source and run with them to demonstrate the route to the food source. And actively modify their movement towards the food source to show them how to get there from the colony. These are the animals where there is generally accepted evidence for active teaching and learning. The pied babbler, which teaches its young specific song components that get used in the dialect of the bird. The ant we just talked about, Temnothorax, the meerkats, which we'll talk about in a bit, that teach their young how to hunt. And of course humans, in this case, Welcome Back Cotter, which is a story about a student who returns to his old school to become a teacher. So there's another kind of information transfer that operates on a social mechanism in animals and can be passed through generations to modify behavior, and that's cultural transmission, which doesn't require as much active input. And this might be a good example of it.
That I can tell you in one word. Tradition!
So that's the basic concept of cultural transmission. A series of animals or a small group begin a particular behavior, often based on their environment, and then that behavior is replicated in animals that observe them performing it. And that doesn't have to be an active process where they modify it and slow it down and parse it all out. It could just be through eavesdropping or through someone that is associated with their social group picking up the behavior. And we often find evidence for this by looking at multiple groups within certain regions that might exchange members, or that we can prove exchange members through genetic factors. And these are examples of cultural transmission ideas. These are passive forms, or relatively passive forms, it's believed, of information communication, where syntax or dialect changes in swamp sparrows and in Psychopteryx bats can be transmitted culturally and extend to multiple groups of these animals over a small geographic region with variation along geographic lines based on the emigration and immigration of bats and birds to these populations. The predator avoidance by fathead guppies has been shown to be culturally transmitted. Fathead guppies are only inclined to be afraid of pike in the presence of guppies who have already experienced pike. Wolves and dogs are believed to transmit through imitation various play behaviors and stereotyped sorts of initiations, not exactly the most standard like the play bow and stuff, but variations on it, just as the swamp sparrow has variations on these common song patterns. And the Caledonian crow has tool modification, which is believed to be culturally transmitted and can be done through eavesdropping. Similarly, chimps have been shown to have that going on. And of course, Reddit is sort of a passive upload, although no one's parsing anything out there. They're just broadcasting information with the explicit intention of attracting eavesdroppers or of putting it to a very wide audience, depending on how you look at that. This is an example of cultural transmission in a charismatic mammal, the killer whale or the orca, where you've got these multiple pods occupying some large region, and they migrate up and down that region, and there's sort of, as the generations shift, the pods become more and more related because various dispersing orcas will carry on the genetic patterns of one pod or another. So looking at the matrilineal DNA of the orcas in this particular area of British Columbia, these guys found that they could learn call types or small variations in the frequency patterns of their songs and calls in general to transmit and then transmit those new call types or those variations on call types to the new pods that they would occupy. And you could measure the matrilineal influence of a given pod by where its daughters had dispersed to and with whom they were associating by the spread of these dialects. And here, if you're interested in the spectrographic concept, is the measure of the frequencies. And the low pulse is the part that gets varied by the call type, and the high pulse is sort of static throughout all call types, and those get strung out into sentences, and the variation is a little bit like an accent, you can think of it, because it's within the individual pronunciations of these components of the call, rather than the sort of overall structure of the calls. Here's an example of what's considered active teaching, where meerkats hunt scorpions regularly, which are obviously a dangerous thing to hunt, although they are slightly resistant to their venom. And they have a way of instructing their pups to deal with those scorpions and to learn to hunt them over time. Pups give out a begging call when they're interested in receiving pedagogy, as we also see sometimes in humans. So the adult meerkat goes and kills a scorpion, at first when the pup is very young and brings it to the pup. And then slightly later it goes and it doesn't kill the scorpion, but it does bite off its sting. And then it hands it off to the pup. And maybe it cripples it as well so it can't get away once the pup drops it, which they almost always do at first. And so then slowly it stops crippling it quite as much and builds up to a situation where the pup is able to eat a whole scorpion and either knows to crunch off the sting before attempting to consume the scorpion, which is how meerkats avoid getting stung, or is at least able to hold on to the thing before they, long enough to eat it after their parent or guardian, in this case, because meerkats don't always, sometimes they have babysitters, has given them the scorpion without the stinger. So, under these circumstances, you're exposing yourself to a lot of danger. You're, parsing out your own hunt in these long, drawn-out ways that don't seem particularly beneficial immediately, because you're carrying around a live scorpion when you could be eating it. Why would you go and give that live scorpion, which was trying to pinch you with its claws, to some pup? Well, maybe it can be a situation in which you need, like with scorpions, a specialized technique for consuming those resources or for acquiring those resources. And a similar thing would occur if you're learning any sort of human business, including being a Jedi, or if you're learning how to find food as an ant, or whatever example of teaching you want to use. They usually involve the instruction in a specialized task. And the idea is that the naive individual is less able to perform that task, and that through a slowed down demonstration is able to gain those skills. And so if you rely on the presence of young in your social group to sustain your population, then you need to somehow manage to pass on your skill set to that subsequent generation and prevent them from dying by just learning through trial and error. Because if you're trying to learn through trial and error how to eat a scorpion, you don't get too many errors before you don't have another chance to have a trial. So the last thing is just think about the dog video and, does it meet this definition? Is this teaching? And